Wondering which decks you should play first in Rise of Shadows without committing too much arcane dust or gold? Well, let's talk about it.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right, Rise of Shadows is finally here, and I know for a lot of people, figuring out what decks to play first in a new expansion can be really tough, because the meta is not settled, we don't really know which cards are good just yet. So I want to propose some starter decks for Rise of Shadows that certainly include some new Rise of Shadows cards and archetypes, but they won't break the bank where you're spending all of your arcane dust or your gold to open packs. So you can still ease into the meta with some decks that are probably going to be competitive, but you can wait it out for a few weeks, see where things settle, and then commit more of your arcane dust so you make sure you're equipped to handle the rest of the Rise of Shadows meta. Now, before I jump into some deck lists that I've already prepared that'll be a great starting spot, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the new Autocomplete deck builder in Hearthstone. Now, Hearthstone's always had this tool where if you go into a deck and it's empty and you hit the Autocomplete button, it'll build you a reasonable deck utilizing the cards you have. But in a recent patch, this got overhauled in a big way, and it's much smarter and much better now. So if you go in and use the Autocomplete deck builder, it's actually going to build you maybe the best deck possible for that class utilizing your own cards. So after you've opened a few Rise of Shadows packs or crafted a few of your favorite cards, you can go into Hearthstone, use this autocomplete tool, and end up with a really competitive deck. So for a lot of people, this will be your best course of action. Like, you can just go and play your cards as well as possible and you're set, and just keep adding to that and keep updating your deck. And this tool allows you to compete whether you're on a budget, whether you're a new player, or you're just looking to ease into the meta. The Autocomplete Deck Builder is a perfect tool to do that. Now, if you feel like your results from the Deck Builder aren't there, maybe you haven't opened that many packs, and you're looking for a little bit more guidance, well, I have a few decks here that'll help you get things started. So let's go ahead and jump into these. Up first here, I have a Silence Priest list coming in at only 1,560 dust. And this utilizes a lot of new Rise of Shadows cards. We have this new Silence package in Rise of Shadows with cards like Dalaran Librarian, the Arcane Watcher, and Unsleeping Soul, including a few other just big dudes in Priest like Hinge Clan Shadequill, or other minions that synergize really well with big guys like the Faceless Rager. So what you end up here with is a pretty aggressive deck that has some combo potential thanks to Divine Spirit and Inner Fire, and just plays really big minions and is able to just hammer your opponents in the early game with minions that are way overstated for what they are. So your Ancient Watchers and your Arcane Watchers are enormous. You silence those really quickly so they can attack. Then you start to stack buffs on top of them, and before you know it, you've got like some 10/10 minions just hitting your opponent in the face. This deck has complementary pieces that all just synergize with that plan. Things like Circle of Healing help you heal your minions up to full if they take damage, or just make big plays with things like Injured Blade Master. A lot of high health minions. You've also got utility from cards like Auchenai Soul Priest with your Circle of Healing, where that provides you with some board clear opportunities, so you can kind of reload if your opponent gets off to a faster start. Just clear their board and start over with more big minions yet again. Now, this deck can run out of gas to some extent, like it's not going to last forever. You can't just keep reloading threats, but if you get that strong early to mid game push, you'll often just overwhelm opponents before they can find answers to all of your really high statted minions. So what that means is this deck's very affordable. It doesn't take a lot of commitment. It utilizes a really cool new package in Rise of Shadows that's probably going to get more support in the future as well. So having these cards around can be handy. I also think this is just going to be a fun, competitive way to get started in the Rise of Shadows meta. So next up here, let's talk about a new Hunter list. This one comes in at only 900 dust. Now, you'll note there's a legendary in there, Archmage Vargoth, but this is a card that everybody gets for free just for logging into Rise of Shadows. So you're going to have that. That's not a dust commitment, so only 900 arcane dust makes this deck really affordable to play. Now, this is modeled after the mid-range hunters we've seen pretty successful in the Rastakhan's Rumble meta. They've been a very powerful deck. There are some changes, of course, because a lot of those cards rotated out of standard format, but we've also got some new Rise of Shadows cards in here as well. Things like Mark Shot make the list as a nice mid-game removal tool that can generate you some resources, because this deck does run out of resources fairly quickly. Archmage Vargoth himself synergizes really well with some of the spells in this deck. Things like Animal Companion go really nicely just to get yourself an extra minion, or even just little things like Secret Plan are good to generate an additional resource. The same can be said for Mark Shot. Now, some of the spells are a little bit risky because you could end up, hitting your Archmage Vargoth with your Marked Shot or your Baited Arrow or your Kill Command, but that's okay because you still got a lot of upside in other spells. And frankly, when you're playing on a budget, you just kind of have to run cards. And Vargoth has some potential, reasonably statted minion. If you were going all out, you could replace him with a Houndmaster Shaw and end up with a better result. But for now, he works fairly well. We also have the Shimmerfly in this list, a fun new card, getting you started on turn 1 and generating some spells, and those spells, again, can be really good with Vargoth. And then finally, the Hinch Clan Hogsteed, I think a really high utility 2-mana beast minion in this deck, can go really well with things like Scavenging Hyena. And as we saw with Midrange Hunter in the past, Scavenging Hyena can, in and of itself, be a great win condition for this deck. Just build a huge Hyena using your Spring Paws or your Unleash the Hounds or now your Hinch Clan Hogsteeds instantly, and opponents sometimes can't deal with that, and you just hit them in the face really hard. Beyond that, you're just playing for a curve here where you're trying to play minions out as quickly as you can, ramping them into stronger things, saving some damage, using your hero power, kill commands, hit your opponent really hard, and kill them pretty quickly. If you have to shift into a mid-game, there's still some options there with cards like Baited Arrow, Unleash the Beast. Those can create some pretty big threats and help you get over the hump if your opponent survives your early pressure push. So all in all here, a deck that has some proven track record of being successful just with some substitutes in the new meta here, I think will remain strong, still remains incredibly affordable. So if you already have a lot of these cards laying around, and most of you will, then this would be a really easy way to get started in Rise of Shadows. And then finally here, one last deck. Let's take a look at this new Zoo Warlock list I've built. Now, Zoo Warlock is an incredibly safe archetype every time there's new expansion because we know Warlock's hero power is really good at fueling this style of deck where you're just playing a lot of small minions really quickly, reloading your hand with the hero power, and just overwhelming your opponent. And we have some nifty new tools in Rise of Shadows to help you do that. If you look here, things like Rafam's Scheme can be a really quick reload. Now, admittedly, this is probably not the strongest card in the entire expansion, but it works really well for this sort of deck if you're looking to build a cheap, efficient deck. It's only a common, so very affordable to craft. We also have things like Evil Genius, which can help us kill off, desirable things like Scarab Eggs or Mecharoos, which are cool because then we get some lackeys in hand, and I think lackeys are perfect for Zoo, really cheap minions that help you capitalize on a board state. We have Inferno, which can be a nice swing card where we essentially AoE damage our opponent's deck or our board while simultaneously buffing our board. Getting all these demons in this deck some extra attack can go a long way towards finding the damage you need or just swinging things in a really favorable state. And then even cards like Portal Keeper, which you might think is a bit of an odd fit for a deck like this, but namely you need demons to make your Void Analysts and Infernos good plays, so having a Portal Keeper in hand can get some nice buffs and it becomes a really scary 4-drop. Beyond that, when you're life tapping a lot as a Zoo Warlock, you're going to hit those 2/2 demons on board as well, so that just stacks up on your demon synergy cards essentially, so it actually fits fairly well. So all in all, we have a list here that's very fast, very aggressive, still has some mid-game strength with cards like Frostwolf Warlord. You're going to have a lot of imps on the board potentially, so you can get some big 8/8s and stuff off the Warlord that helps you finish the game if you haven't already just overwhelmed your opponent with tons of early game stuff and pressure. So very accessible deck here for a lot of people. Most of these cards are old school cards that you'll already have access to, and the rest are going to be sort of new staple Zoo cards, I think, in a lot of ways. So not a lot of sacrifices to make here, but a list that will still get you moving in the Rise of Shadows meta. So that said, these are just a few really quick starter deck ideas. Now, none of these are going to be perfect, right? We don't know what the meta is going to look like. All of this can change, but these are fairly safe. They're proactive decks that do their own thing. They're not reacting or relying on the meta too much. They're just executing their own game plan. They're also coming from archetypes that have been proven in the past, so there's nothing too crazy or surprising here. We know these sorts of things work fairly well. Are they going to take you to the top of the legend ladder? No, absolutely not. But are they going to win you some games, get you moving, create some fun in the early meta? Absolutely they will, and you can use these to grow and build, and especially rely on that autocomplete deck builder to go even farther with your collection once you have some really good cards stacking up. All that said, if you have any thoughts, comments, questions on these decks, of course you can leave those in the comments below. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.